This is Through the Techades, a series of videos dedicated to hardware and technology from the past. In this episode, we're going to travel back to 2003 to have a look at one of the most ambitious mobile phones to ever exist. R. Kelly was hot and fresh out the kitchen, and the Iraq War had just begun. But the early 2000s were also a time of innovation, and behemoth company Nokia were about to do just that within the cell phone industry. The world used to be a very different place in terms of pocket-sized technology. I mean, it's quite hard to imagine not having your good friend the smartphone by your side. But back in the early 2000s, there was no such thing. If you wanted to play a game on the go, for example, chances are you would be playing on a Game Boy, as Nintendo dominated the handheld market at this time. Many companies tried to compete with Nintendo during the 90s and early 2000s, but none quite managed to knock them from their handheld throne. But despite Nintendo's ever-growing power, especially with the release of the new Game Boy Advance SP, Nokia were ready to take on the standards of mobile gaming as we know it. This is the N-Gage, Nokia's bold step forward into the console market. An innovation achieved by combining a mobile phone with the functionality of a games console. But its features don't end there. It was a fully fledged PDA of which could be described as one of the first smartphones in existence. That might be a slight exaggeration, but it was jam-packed with features for a phone from 2003. So within this weird taco-shaped piece of tech lies a lot of the functionality you would expect to find in an electronic organiser or a PDA. Like, this might sound a bit weird considering how far mobile technologies came, but it was a bit of a novelty being able to set a reminder in a calendar or send an email from something portable that could fit in your pocket. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. How in the name of the wee man do you actually make a phone call using this device? Well, you have to awkwardly hold it up to your head as if you're talking into a taco. Now, Nokia clearly did this so that they could make the N-Gage feel a bit more like a handheld games console, but then their choices in design in terms of being a games console weren't exactly stellar either. Let's just say that during your morning commute to work you decide you're going to play some N-Gage. The first question you might ask yourself is, how do I put my games into this thing? Well, you best make sure you're not having a bad morning, because putting a game into this thing is a strenuous task. It involves taking the back off of the phone, removing the battery, then removing the game card from underneath the battery, then putting the game in, then putting the battery back in, and then waiting for the damn device to load back up. Because now, of course, your phone isn't even on.
2,000 years later.
And finally, after all that palaver, you can finally play the game you wanted to play. Now, imagine trying to do that on a busy train on your way to work, or even walking down the street. There's no way that you could easily swap out the game in those kinds of scenarios. It's just going to be a nuisance. I mean, I just can't get my head around why Nokia would make a design choice like this, considering they had already sacrificed the device's functionality as a conventional mobile phone. So you can see why someone wouldn't be in a hurry to choose this over a Game Boy Advance. Nokia did realise their mistakes though, and tossed away the original design in favour for the Nokia N-Gage QD. So apart from making this console smaller, they made it so that you could make phone calls holding it normally, and they also put a cartridge slot in the bottom so that you didn't have to discombobulate it to get a game in. As well as giving the QD a nicer display, they also refined the D-pad and the number keypad to make games play a little bit more like a conventional handheld console. This is pretty much the design that the original handheld deserved, because this was actually a perfectly capable games console with rather impressive graphics for the size of the device and the time it was released. Not to mention the fact that the N-Gage actually has an impressive catalogue of games available for it. And the fact that you could get fully fledged physical copies of games for this console kinda sounds weird considering the state of mobile gaming in the digital age of today. Here we have a sealed copy of FIFA for the N-Gage, of which we're going to open up and show you exactly what you would have expected to receive back in the day for your hard-earned cash. Collectors can rejoice because N-Gage games come in hard clamshell cases, so you're not going to have the same nightmare that you have when you're collecting for the Game Boy Advance and all the boxes have disintegrated because they're made out of cardboard. Another great thing about N-Gage games is that there isn't a lot of wasted space within the box. That's actually something that bugs me a little bit about Nintendo Switch games, because you get basically the same kind of size of memory card, but you get hee-haw else inside the box. Although, to be fair, I don't really have much use for this Dead Sea Scrolls style list of hazards and disclaimers. But each game did come with this rather nifty compact case to fit 4 games in for if you're travelling, for example. Which is a great thing to have, because you can imagine looking at the size of these game cartridges, they're going to be really easy to lose and you're going to be unlikely to be carrying around the whole game case with you on a daily basis. Not to mention, if you shove this cartridge into a bag without a case, it's probably going to end up damaging the label or the pins at the back. And last but not least, how could we forget, it's the legend, the myth, it's an instruction booklet. And this one is quite a nice quality and it's also in colour. And that's something you just don't get anymore. When was the last time you opened up a PlayStation 4 game or a Nintendo Switch game and there was anything in there other than the game? And speaking of games, the N-Gage was actually capable of graphics which weren't far off the likes of the original PlayStation 1. And when you consider the fact that most of the titles available on the Game Boy Advance looked like something you would get on a Super Nintendo, this made the N-Gage look rather impressive at the time. The thing is, it wasn't as if PlayStation 1 games were a relic of the past back in 2003. In fact, they were still pretty much relevant due to the fact that the PlayStation 2 was backwards compatible with them. So it's definitely impressive that the N-Gage was capable of pulling off these kinds of 3D graphics despite the fact it could fit in your pocket. But it wasn't just PlayStation ports that you could get for your N-Gage. There was the likes of Asphalt, which was a great 3D racer of which was exclusive to the N-Gage at the time. And it's actually surprising how diverse the range of games is for the N-Gage. I mean, you got sports games, you got platformers, you got adventure games, you got racing games, and you even got an Elder Scrolls game for this console, which is just kind of weird. But good weird. So regardless of what kind of games you're actually into, it was highly likely you were going to find something you would enjoy playing on the N-Gage. And despite the fact this console is, unconventional, you didn't get the big players such as EA shying away from it. You actually got games like FIFA and The Sims on here, and you know what, those titles sell consoles. People buy consoles just to play those games. I know some people that bought a PlayStation 4 and all they play is FIFA. And despite the fact that titles like The Sims are scaled down versions of the original games that might have appeared on the PC or on a console, people would still be pretty happy to play the likes of these games on a mobile device. And the N-Gage also gets gold stars for not using any form of region locking, which means you could import games from other countries and expand your library even further. This wasn't the only thing the N-Gage wasn't protected against though, because you might have noticed that the memory cards of which the games are on look kinda familiar. They're actually based on a format called MMC, of which is very similar to an SD card apart from you're missing a couple of pins. This made it very easy to pirate games on the N-Gage. And despite the fact that MMC cards are smaller than most other video game cartridges and disc formats, you could actually get things like films preloaded onto these cards of which you could play back on your mobile. But sadly, the N-Gage couldn't be saved by good games and nifty features alone, because its design flaws basically doomed it from the start. Nokia may very well have been pioneers of mobile gaming, but they learned the hard way that you can't just mash together a mobile phone and a games console and hope for the best. And the unforgiving world of technology wasn't going to wait for Nokia to correct its mistakes with the N-Gage QD, with the veterans of the video game industry working away in a Moore's Law type of fashion. So after the N-Gage was discontinued in 2005, Nokia went back to doing what they do best, making mobile handsets. But they actually applied some of the knowledge from the N-Gage to their future devices, especially when it comes to devices with PDA functionality, as they used their Symbian operating system to make it more than just something you make calls on. Not to mention that the N-Gage brand didn't actually die and came back in 2008 for a brief time in the form of downloadable games for your handset. So some of you might think the N-Gage was just a complete flop, while others might think that it was an innovative piece of technology ahead of its years. But if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the N-Gage was necessary within the industry to really teach us what mobile gaming should be like. So I salute you, N-Gage, you weird taco-shaped piece of tech. Thanks for watching this episode of Through the Techades, and I'll catch you again soon.